story of a young man who unknowingly stepped into hell. When he decided to join the United States Marine Corps, his world didn't just change. It shattered into haunting fragments, a place where darkness constantly lurked. It took months for this new Marine to adapt to the rhythm of military life, a harsh grind where even the mundane was warped by strangeness and unseen fear. The sounds of wind whistling through the barracks at night, sourceless footsteps, and the shadows flickering at the corner of his eye, all made him wonder if he was truly alone. One day, he received the order to go into the field. Hearing it, he thought it was just a simple outing: pitch tents, build fires, live in nature for a few days. Just like camping, he told himself, trying to dispel the unease clawing inside him. But he was wrong. This wasn't camping. This was a doorway to things no one dared to name. For recon Marines like him, going into the field was an endless nightmare. No warm tents, no comforts, only endless patrols through desolate jungles where trees grew so thick they seemed to want to swallow everything. He felt like Mowgli, but without animal friends. Only darkness and strange whispers echoing from afar. Even on the rare occasions they slept in tents, choosing a location wasn't as simple as campers finding a dry, safe spot. The military always chose the worst places: damp swamps, cold, deep forests, or open fields where the wind howled like the cries of lost souls. I've researched long enough to know such places don't just test physical endurance. They are portals for entities not of this world. At his first duty station in Hawaii, going into the field started with packing: food, water, fuel, batteries, rifle, radio, enough to survive a week in hell. He and his comrades lined up for military vehicles, the convoy thundering down the highway, then boarded helicopters heading towards training areas hidden deep in the old jungle. "Everything will be fine," he whispered to himself, but his eyes caught a strange dark shape flitting past the window. The jungles in Hawaii are unlike anywhere else. Trees grow densely packed, their canopy blocking the sky, turning day into night in an instant. Strong winds whistled through the leaves, carrying a bone-chilling cold, while persistent rain soaked his clothes, making them heavy. Night fell. He huddled in his sleeping bag, trying to ward off the cold and the fear growing in his heart. They say the jungles here don't have many dangerous animals, just giant centipedes with bites as painful as stab wounds. But it was the silence itself that made him tremble. No birdsong, no animal calls. Only the wind and something else. "Do you hear that?" he asked his buddy in the dark, voice trembling. His buddy just stayed silent, but his eyes reflected terror. As a researcher, I can assert that isolated areas like this are always breeding grounds for supernatural phenomena. Was it just centipedes? Or was something more terrifying lurking in the dense darkness? I've read hundreds of reports. Tall, faceless figures, guttural laughter in the dead of night, and giant footprints not belonging to humans. This young soldier might not know it yet, but he had entered their territory. Going into the field isn't just training. It's a survival test against things beyond human comprehension. In Hawaii, he felt unseen eyes following his every step. One night, patrolling near a restricted area, he heard heavy footsteps behind him. But when he turned, there was nothing but swaying trees. "Someone's here," he whispered, gripping his rifle tighter. But deep down, he knew it wasn't human. In stark contrast to the gloomy jungles of Hawaii, going into the field at Camp Pendleton, California, threw soldiers into an arid land where death lurked beneath the hot sand. I have set foot there myself, and I felt the unease in the air. as if the ground itself whispered ancient curses. At Pendleton, you might suddenly step on a rattlesnake, its dry rattle echoing like death's laughter in the desert. Dust swirled, obscuring vision, and, in a moment of panic, you hear the faint slithering of something. But when you look down, you only see your own shadow. Or is it really your shadow? Night came. Darkness enveloped the arid desert, and cacti sprouted like demonic arms reaching from the earth. Moving at night, the young soldier inevitably ran into them, sharp spines piercing his clothes, leaving bleeding scratches. Every step echoed an unseen fear. Was this just harsh nature, or was something luring him into a trap? But the next two stories I'm about to tell go far beyond ordinary dangers. In the wild mountains of Northern California, where a Marine faced spectral darkness, and even the mountains of Wisconsin east of the Mississippi River, where a National Guardsman trembling recounted something he never wanted to remember. Both are steeped in horror, as cold as a corpse's breath. I've researched military supernatural phenomena for decades, but I still shudder reading these accounts. They resemble no natural creature. The soldiers emphasize one thing that makes my heart pound. That thing wasn't human. A simple statement, but enough to keep you awake all night. These stories are whispered in the smoke pit, the soldiers' smoking area, where smoke mingles with fear, and even the bravest soldiers bow their heads to recount horrific memories. "Have you heard this one, Professor?" a soldier once asked me, his voice trailing off in the white smoke. I just nodded. Knowing what I was about to hear wasn't for the faint of heart. We researchers call them pale crawlers, or sometimes the Rake. Just hearing the names evokes horrific images. A gaunt entity, skin pale as a corpse, long arms with sharp claws, moving in the dark with terrifying screeches. I've seen sketches from witnesses, and they haunt my dreams. Let's begin with the first story, at the Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center in Bridgeport, California. An email was sent to me in early 2025 from a young Marine. He wrote with trembling hands on the keyboard, as if fearing that just mentioning it would bring the thing back to him. I'm keeping his identity confidential, as he's still on active duty. He doesn't want reprimands from superiors or worse, suspicious looks from his peers. "I'm not crazy," he wrote in the email, as if trying to convince himself. But I know what he experienced wasn't a hallucination. It was a horrifying truth. Stark and chilling. He introduced himself. "I am Corporal Oscar, United States Marine Corps. I want to tell you about something that happened a few years ago when my platoon was training in Bridgeport." His writing style was dry, but I felt the fear behind every word. Bridgeport, a place already known for its unsolved mysteries. "It was around September or October," he continued. "Alpha 2 Platoon from the 1st Combat Engineer Battalion went to Bridgeport for joint exercises with Victor Unit 21. The first night there, he felt something was wrong. Wind blew through the mountains like the moans of someone trapped underground. "Do you hear that?" he asked his buddy, but only got a cold head shake. But he knew he wasn't imagining it. Corporal Oscar's story opens a dark chapter, where darkness isn't just the absence of light. It lives, it breathes, and it hunts. I've read hundreds of similar reports, but this time I felt a chill run down my spine. Bridgeport isn't just a training area. It's the domain of something no one dares to name. Before setting foot in Bridgeport, Corporal Oscar's platoon was summoned to Camp Pendleton for a briefing. The air was stuffy in the briefing room, dim light falling on tense faces. They were warned about altitude sickness, specifically pulmonary edema, an invisible enemy that could fill your lungs with fluid right in the mountains. The officers also mentioned the risk of hallucinations due to lack of oxygen, distorted images, sourceless voices echoing in the head. "Stay calm. Don't panic," they said, but their dry tone couldn't hide their skepticism. I wondered, does the military really believe it's just hallucinations? Or are they trying to cover up something more terrifying they themselves dare not face? Besides the official warnings, whispers spread through the ranks like a chilling wind. Stories were told of sentries jolting awake at night, hearts pounding, hearing the unexpected sounds of hooves and donkeys from the animal packers team passing through the camp. "Did they lose their way?" a sentry mumbled, but his eyes drifted as the darkness out there seemed to move. These half-joking, half-serious stories cast a strange atmosphere over Bridgeport, both exciting and haunting. When the platoon arrived at Lower Base Camp, they got 2 days off to acclimatize to the altitude. The towering mountains surrounding the camp seemed like silent giants watching their every step. A sense of unease crept into Oscar's heart, though he tried to dismiss it. During those 2 days, a few curious soldiers decided to explore. They climbed forbidden peaks, laughing and taking souvenir photos under the gray sky. "Look, I'm king of the mountain," one shouted, posing. But looking at the photos later, Oscar noticed a faint figure standing behind his buddy, an image no one remembered seeing when the picture was taken. Everything remained normal until 2 weeks later, when strange activities began. At night, soldiers gathered around the fire, joking about skinwalkers, shape-shifting witches from Navajo legend who prey on the lost. "Watch out. If you sleep too soundly, it'll come get you." One laughed loudly. But the laughter died when the wind carried a ghastly screech from afar. The jokes seemed harmless, but I know well they can inadvertently awaken something. In Navajo culture, merely mentioning skinwalkers can make you pray. And then, one night, it truly appeared. Not a legend, but a living entity, cold and hungry. That night, in the thick darkness, a few soldiers were setting up camp amidst everyday chatter. "Hey, Rambo, put away your damn knife and help us set up these tarps," a voice called out, slightly annoyed. "First, this is a bayonet," Rambo retorted, proudly holding it up in the moonlight. "Second, you gotta admit it's badass, look." "How much did you pay for that piece of junk?" another asked skeptically. $250, Rambo replied, shrugging. "Jesus, seriously? Did it come with a Camaro financed at 29% APR? Laughter erupted, but was quickly swallowed by the cold wind. "Leave me alone. It's vintage. Now help me set up the tarp, okay?" Rambo snapped. All right. Got it," his buddies muttered, unaware the darkness was tightening around them. That night, during an operation called Cool Sea, Oscar wasn't sure what it stood for, maybe combat operations, the platoon moved to Bridgeport's highest landing zone, LZ Owl. The name sounded peaceful, like an owl's hoot in the night. But I've read enough reports to know this place was the epicenter of terrifying encounters. Under the pale moonlight, Oscar felt unease. The wind whistling through the mountain passes sounded like the cries of someone forgotten. "Do you see anything?" He whispered to the Marine next to him, gripping his rifle. The other just shook his head, but his eyes reflected unspeakable fear. LZ Owl wasn't a destination. It was the hunting ground for something not of this world. At LZ Owl, under a night sky as cold as death's breath, Corporal Oscar's platoon began setting up shelter with ragged tarps. Wind howled through the mountain passes, carrying biting cold, and the pale moonlight cast an eerie glow on everything. I know well that places like this aren't just shelters. They are arenas for nameless entities. Oscar recounted a detail that chilled me. The tree they chose to anchor the tarp was right next to a sheer cliff face, towering like a natural wall reaching the dark sky. The location seemed safe, sheltered from wind and snow. But in my eyes, it was the perfect place for something to hide. A patient predator, watching them through crevices in the rock with unblinking eyes. At the time, Oscar was a lance corporal, shoulder to shoulder with two buddies, a seasoned lance corporal engineer and a lance corporal water dog, a water purification specialist with a reckless grin. The three of them, under the dim moonlight, used large round stones like giant pebbles and wooden stakes to anchor the tarp corners, creating a pyramid-shaped shelter leaning against the old tree trunk. One end of the tarp was tied securely to the tree trunk, the rest fanning out like wilted petals, forming a lean-to surrounding the base of the tree. The design was clever, allowing rain and snowmelt to run off, keeping them and their gear dry underneath. But I couldn't help thinking that the tree itself, with its rough bark and gnarled branches like twisted arms, seemed alive, waiting for something. Another detail caught my attention. The water dog had a habit of fiddling with his rifle. He owned a sharp bayonet, often fixing it to the muzzle, handling it like a prized toy. "Look, sharp enough to cut the wind," he boasted to Oscar, eyes gleaming with pride. This seemingly harmless habit, I knew, would soon become the trigger for the nightmare about to unfold. When night fell completely, darkness swallowed everything, and the first snowflakes began to fall, silent as lost souls. The biting cold pierced the thin tarp, turning their breath into white mist. Oscar shivered, pulling his sleeping bag tighter, seeking warmth amidst the howling wind outside. They crawled under the tarp, huddling in sleeping bags like small animals fleeing a storm. It was around 9 p.m., the silence of the mountains enveloping everything, only the sound of wind whistling through the rocks mixed with the gentle fall of snow. A seemingly peaceful sound, yet it made Oscar's heart beat faster. "Are you cold?" he whispered to the water dog, but only received a shivering nod. I've researched long enough to recognize that silence isn't peace. It's a warning. In old reports, I've read about nights like this in Bridgeport. When snow falls, the air grows heavy and strange figures begin to appear. Oscar and his buddies didn't know they had pitched camp right on the border between the human world and another dimension. Under the tarp, the weak light from Oscar's small flashlight flickered, illuminating his tense face. The clatter of the water dog's bayonet scraping against its sheath broke the silence. "Put it away! Stop messing with it!" the engineer lance corporal snapped, his voice hoarse from the cold. But the water dog just smirked. "Relax. If anything comes crawling, I'll stab it dead." Those words, I fear, had inadvertently challenged the darkness. Around 10 p.m. in the cold of LZ Owl, Oscar was jolted awake by a sharp sound tearing through the dead silence of the mountains. Click, clack. The dry sound of a rifle bolt being racked echoed, like breaking bones in the dead of night. I've heard hundreds of similar stories, and I know. It wasn't just a sound. It was a warning from another world. In a harsh, tactical environment, where unnecessary noise is strictly forbidden, this action was like painting a target on the unit's back. It could draw the enemy, human or otherwise, right to their position. Under the pale moonlight filtering through the tarp, Oscar strained his eyes, his breath turning into trembling white mist in the freezing air. His M4 and the engineer LCPLs lay silent on the ground, covered in a thin layer of snow. But the water dog's rifle was hidden behind the tree trunk, out of Oscar's sight. It's that guy messing with his bayonet again, he thought silently, trying to stay calm, though his heart began to pound like it would burst from his chest. He called out softly, "Hey, was that you messing with your rifle?" The water dog stirred, crawling out of his sleeping bag, eyes groggy but voice firm. "Wasn't me." That denial struck Oscar's fragile calm like a knife. If not him, then who? I've read reports of sourceless sounds in Bridgeport, noises no one could explain, as if the darkness itself spoke. Oscar told himself it was probably some of the infantry guys with them, sneaking around for fun. But deep down, he felt something was wrong. Determined not to be messed with, he drew his sharp K-bar knife from its sheath, the steel glinting in the moonlight. He crawled out from under the tarp, the biting cold piercing his clothes. But he gritted his teeth, ready to scare off the prankster. Outside, darkness swallowed him like a giant mouth. Snow fell heavier, wind howled through the cliffs like the cries of lost souls. Oscar scanned the surroundings, but there wasn't a soul in sight, only motionless trees, like silent witnesses. "What the hell?" he muttered, gripping the knife, his trembling breath mingling with the freezing air. Just then, a deep, rough voice sounded from behind, startling him. "Hey, Oscar! What the hell are you doing out here?" It was the sergeant, his face hidden in shadow, sharp eyes fixed on him. "Sergeant?" Oscar replied, his voice weak from cold and fear. I heard a noise." "Did you hear something like someone racking a rifle?" "Yeah." The sergeant nodded, his voice low as if suppressing something. "Was that you guys?" Oscar shook his head vigorously. "Not us, Sergeant." He squinted at the knife in Oscar's hand. "What's the knife for?" "I came out thinking it might be the infantry guys messing around," Oscar explained. But even he didn't believe that theory anymore. All right." The sergeant nodded, his gaze sweeping over the cliff face as if searching for something. "Let me go ask the sentry team if they were messing around." He turned and walked away, his figure disappearing into the white snow, leaving Oscar alone in the dead of night. A wave of unease washed over him, as if thousands of unseen eyes were boring into his back. A moment later, the sergeant returned, his face grim under the moonlight. "They don't know anything over there." He shook his head, his voice cold. "All right, get back inside and sleep." Oscar reluctantly crawled back into his sleeping bag, still clutching the knife, trying to push away the strange sound and the feeling of being watched. But I knew that whatever made the noise wasn't human, and it hadn't left. Under the tarp, a heavy atmosphere enveloped the three Marines. The water dog muttered, probably just the wind, but his voice trembled, unconvincing even to himself. Oscar remained silent, eyes fixed on the darkness outside, where moonlight played on the cliff face, creating distorted shapes that seemed to move. Sleep that night was no longer a refuge. It was a doorway leading him into the waiting nightmare. The next time Oscar opened his eyes was 6 a.m. when the sharp sound of the Reveille bugle call pierced the thick morning fog covering LZ Owl. But the sight before him turned him and his two buddies to stone. The tarps, their fragile shelter, now lay strewn across the ground, torn and crumpled, as if ripped from the tree by an unseen hand in a fit of rage. I shuddered reading this. This was no accident. It was a sign of a malevolent presence. Even more terrifying, the small rocks and wooden stakes anchoring the tarp had vanished without a trace. No fragments, no drag marks, not a speck of disturbed dust. They evaporated as if they had never existed. Oscar knelt, touching the cold ground, searching for a clue. But only emptiness answered. "What the hell happened here?" he muttered, his voice lost in the freezing air. While the three Marines were still stunned, the sergeant approached, his face stiff, eyes showing a rare unease. He pulled Oscar aside, his voice low and rough. "I saw something last night after I told you to go back to sleep." He recounted slowly, as if each word was heavy. He hadn't spoken up immediately, thinking it was just a hallucination, from fatigue, altitude, or the darkness playing tricks on his mind. But now, he wasn't so sure. The sergeant related that just as Oscar crawled into his sleeping bag, a strange feeling made him look up at the towering cliff face behind the camp. Under the pale moonlight, he saw it. A naked, humanoid figure, completely bald. Eyes glowing like two embers burning in the dark. It stood there on the cliff edge, looking down at them with deadly stillness. "It didn't move," he whispered to Oscar, "but I felt it knew we were here." The figure was gaunt, emaciated to the point of being almost inhuman. Bones protruding under pale white skin like a walking skeleton. Yet within that frailty was an ancient, primal quality, exuding a wordless threat. The moment the sergeant's eyes met it, the figure immediately recoiled, silently vanishing into the darkness atop the rocks, as if it had never been there. I recognized it instantly. This was the sign of what we call a pale crawler, or worse, the rake. Oscar stood there listening to the sergeant, a chill running down his spine. He suddenly recalled a video he'd seen, a man filming around his house, suspecting a skinwalker or rake was lurking. When the man spotted the creature on his roof, it too ducked down and vanished in an instant. "I thought I misheard the noise on the roof," he mumbled, his voice trembling. This coincidence wasn't random. It was a terrifying confirmation. Initially, the sergeant had also convinced himself it was just a hallucination. He went back to sleep, trying to push the ghastly image from his mind. But now, seeing the destroyed tarps and vanished rocks, he couldn't remain silent any longer. "I don't know what it was," he told Oscar, his gaze lost in the morning mist. "But it wasn't normal." Oscar nodded, but in his heart he didn't believe it was a human prank. If it were infantry or someone messing around, he whispered to the water dog later, we would have heard footsteps, rolling rocks, or at least the wind as they ripped the tarp. But there was nothing, not a sound. The water dog looked at him, face pale. "So what do you think it was?" Oscar didn't answer, but fear choked his throat. In his email to me, Oscar concluded, "Whatever it was, it moved more silently and with more discipline than any infantryman or marine I've ever encountered." A chilling observation from a soldier trained to detect the enemy. I shivered, reading those words. I knew that this was a predator that leaves no trace, makes no sound, and does not belong to this world. Under the faint dawn light, the platoon packed up the remains of the camp. But no one dared say much. "Let's pretend we didn't see anything, okay?" the sergeant ordered, his voice hoarse, but his eyes remained fixed on the cliff face, as if expecting the figure to return. Oscar nodded, but inside him, the haunting had taken root. His sleep would never be peaceful again, because he knew that thing was still out there, somewhere, waiting. In the email, Oscar also attached several photos taken at Bridgeport, vivid evidence of their time facing the darkness. I opened each file on my screen, and every scene made my heart clench. Majestic mountains rising against a grey sky, endless desolate forests, all exuding a cold beauty, hiding an unspoken threat. One photo showed the cliff where the sergeant saw the strange figure, and I swear, in a blurry corner, I felt something that didn't belong to nature. Looking at those photos, I couldn't help but shudder. What did the sergeant really see? A fleeting shadow, or a living entity with unknowable intentions? At least, I muttered to myself, it only messed with your gear and didn't take your lives. But even that thought couldn't calm the unease clawing inside me. Imagine Oscar standing before the supply section, sweating, trying to explain, "What happened to your tarp?" "Sir, a rake took it." I can picture the supply officer rolling his eyes, shouting, "Are you drunk or crazy?" No one would believe such a story. Not because it isn't true, but because it's too horrifying to accept. I've seen similar reports dismissed in military files, buried under labels like hallucination or fatigue. But the most terrifying thing, and the reason I started documenting these stories, is that Oscar wasn't alone. I've received dozens of emails, letters, even late-night calls from soldiers worldwide recounting similar encounters during field training. Creatures resembling pale crawlers or rakes aren't rare phenomena. They are a recurring nightmare, scattered in the darkness from Bridgeport to other remote forests. In my archives, reports of these entities fill the shelves. There are stories from the continental US, a National Guardsman in Wisconsin trembling as he described glowing eyes watching him from the bushes. There are testimonies from abroad. A British and a German soldier, during training in the Bavarian forest, described a gaunt, pale creature lurking among the trees. "It stood there, looking at me," the German soldier wrote, "as if it knew who I was. I wonder, what are they? A type of hairless Bigfoot, emaciated from starvation? An extraterrestrial being with morbid curiosity? Or something more ancient, born from primordial darkness, before humans even walked the earth? Only God, if he still watches over us, knows. I've scoured every scientific book, from biology to metaphysics, but not a single line mentions this thing. It's a gap in human knowledge, and it's alive. Oscar offered no theory about the sound he and the sergeant heard. The sharp click, clack of an M4 being charged, echoing in the dead of night. But I have a speculation that makes my own hair stand on end. That sound wasn't random, not a soldier's prank. I once read a report from Afghanistan. A platoon heard the sound of a weapon being loaded in the middle of the desert, but none of them had touched their firearms. Later, they found footprints, long, thin, not human. "What do you think it was, Professor?" a colleague once asked when I recounted Oscar's story. I fell silent, eyes fixed on the cliff photo in the email. Perhaps the creature wasn't just destructive. It was playing, testing. The sound of the rifle being charged might have been its way of mimicking, like some macabre parrot learning the sounds of its prey. Or worse, it wanted them to know it was there, closer than they thought. These entities, when described by trembling witnesses, always share a characteristic that chills me. They are superhuman climbers. They cling to sheer cliffs or scale trees with terrifying agility, nimble as ghosts in the wind. I once read a report from Alaska. A patrolling soldier saw something climb a rock face in mere seconds, leaving deep gouges in the stone, marks no known animal could explain, sogs facts. And because the sound woke Oscar from a drowsy sleep, rather than him being awake to hear it, I began to imagine another scenario. The click, clack he mistook for the sound of a charging handle, sharp like scraping and impacting metal, might not have been from an M4. In a half-awake, half-asleep state amidst the tense mountain forest, it could easily be confused with a sharp crack, the sound of a dry branch snapping under the weight of something. If the sergeant's eyes didn't deceive him, and I believe they didn't, then the creature could have been right in the tree above their heads. I picture it, gaunt, pale, glowing eyes hidden in the foliage, observing their every breath. When the sergeant or a sentry accidentally got too close, it panicked and scrambled down, claws scraping the bark, breaking a branch in its hasty escape. That sound, just for a moment, echoed like a final warning. This would explain why no one heard or saw anything before. It wasn't on the ground, not lurking around the camp. It was hiding above, patient as a predator awaiting its chance. I shudder to think of Oscar and his buddies sleeping peacefully under the tarp, completely unaware that something was hovering just feet above them, claws ready to strike at any moment. Whatever it was, this incident clearly demonstrates why the military still maintains the practice of posting guards, even during seemingly harmless training exercises. The water dog once scoffed, "What's the point of guard duty when there's just snow and wind?" But after that night, he didn't dare say another word. I just want to send a message. Always stay alert out there, boys, because the darkness is never empty. It always hides unblinking eyes. Now, let's leave the cold cliffs of Bridgeport for another forest, at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, where a National Guardsman faced an even more terrifying nightmare. I received an email from him a few months ago, accompanied by a trembling line. I don't know what it was, but I'm never going back there. His story is another dark chapter in my book of the supernatural. At Fort McCoy, the morning air vibrated with an officer's shout. "All right, ladies, let's go, let's go. Move your asses and plot your points. The sooner we get out there, the sooner we get done." His voice echoed through the woods, urging the sleepy young soldiers clutching rifles and maps. But deep inside, everyone felt an unusual chill, as if the deep forest breathed the breath of death. A nearby veteran smirked, whispering to his buddy, "Unless you ladies are prior service, there's no hope for you. The LT is notoriously bad at land nav." Chuckles rippled, but quickly died as the wind blew, carrying a strange whistling sound from deep within the woods. I know well. That sarcasm couldn't hide the growing fear in their hearts, because what awaited them needed no map to find its way. This second story came to me via the Phantoms and Monsters website, sent by a National Guardsman with trembling hands on the keyboard. He began the email. "I want to share an experience I faced while training with my unit at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin." His writing was dry, but I sensed the fear behind each word, a fear he dared not voice to his comrades. He continued, "I transitioned from enlisted to officer through the ROTC program, then was assigned to a unit related to my military occupational specialty while still in the course." He declined to reveal details about his service, adding only a short line. "This community is small, and I don't want anyone recognizing me. I understand the need for anonymity. Stories like this are not only sensitive, but can also ruin a soldier's reputation in the eyes of superiors." In 2014, his platoon decided to conduct a nightland navigation training exercise at Fort McCoy from 8:30 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. the next morning. I've been to this area, a dense forest where darkness is thick as ink and the wind whistling through the canopy sounds like the whispers of lost souls. Just thinking about walking alone in there makes my heart beat faster. The military usually requires operating in pairs, he explained, but Nightland Nav is a rare exception where we were allowed to go solo. The goal was to test each soldier's ability. Could they complete the mission alone in the dark without guidance? "You okay, going solo like this?" a buddy had asked him before they started. He just nodded, but deep down, he wasn't sure he was ready. With a compass in hand, a map folded in his pocket, and a headlamp emitting a faint glow, he began his journey along the pre-plotted course. I imagine him walking, each footstep rustling on the dry leaves, eyes straining in the darkness. Fort McCoy is no place for the faint-hearted. Its forests have been the backdrop for numerous supernatural reports I keep in my files. Land navigation, or land nav, is the art of finding hidden control points within the training area. He had to plot coordinates on the map, then move from point to point by reading the terrain, identifying natural features, and relying on his compass. At night, this task becomes a nightmare. Everything is blurry, and every tree shadow could be an enemy, or worse, something not of this world. To survive in the darkness, he had to use as little light as possible. When needing his flashlight, he used the red lens filter, emitting a dim glow like dried blood. "Reduces impact on night vision," he told himself, repeating the instructor's words. But I know well. The red light isn't just for protecting eyes. It also helps hide him from unseen eyes, stalking the deep woods. Noise discipline was essential. Every step had to be light, every breath suppressed. "Don't let them hear you," he muttered to himself when a dry twig snapped underfoot, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence. In theory, these techniques prepared him for combat in a real, tactical environment. But that night, he didn't know what enemy he was facing, human or something far more terrifying. Under the Fort McCoy canopy, the air felt heavy. Wind blew through, carrying the smell of damp earth and something else. A pungent, rank odor, undefinable. I, Professor Hayes, have heard hundreds of stories about nights like these, where soldiers thought they were the hunters, only to become the prey. He didn't know that by stepping into the darkness, he had inadvertently invited a terrifying encounter. The soldier recounted in his email, his writing dry but trembling. "I moved through the woods, making a half-hearted attempt not to be seen or heard." I can picture him walking through the dense darkness of Fort McCoy, each step carefully placed on the damp leaf litter. Breath held, as if afraid to disturb something lurking nearby. He didn't know that on that night, such caution still wasn't enough. "The woods I passed through were part of a larger forest system," he wrote, "but frequented by people. I've set foot in forests like that, vast, dense, but never truly wild." That night, about 15 soldiers were also trudging through the darkness, compasses and maps in hand. "We're not alone out here," he told himself when he heard leaves rustling in the distance. But I knew the presence of comrades couldn't dispel the horror drawing near. His only light source was a small headlamp, switchable between red and white light. "Initially, I set it so the red light came on first," he explained. "Turn it on, it's red. Turn it off, turn it back on after a few seconds, still red." He had adjusted it carefully before starting, because the dim red light was the only thing keeping him hidden in the darkness. Or so he hoped. He detailed how the lamp worked. To switch to white light, I had to turn it off twice. Turn it on the first time, it's solid white. Turn it off, turn it back on immediately, flashing white. Turn it off again, turn it back on, solid red. Turn off again, turn on again, flashing red. Then off completely. Turn back on, it resets to solid white. I imagine him standing in the woods, hands trembling as he checked the lamp before setting off, muttering, "Just don't fail on me." That lamp wasn't just a tool, it was his lifeline. "I'm not detailing this for no reason," he stressed, and I felt the tension in his words. I'll explain shortly why it's important. A mundane detail about a headlamp's mechanism, seemingly just a technical explanation, was about to become crucial in the nightmare he was about to face. I shuddered. Knowing what he would recount next was not for the faint of heart. Under the Fort McCoy canopy, the red light from his headlamp illuminated rough tree trunks, creating distorted shadows that danced in the wind. He walked on, compass trembling slightly in his hand, trying to keep his breathing steady. "Stay calm," he whispered to himself. But deep down he felt an unusual chill, as if the forest was breathing, living, and watching him with thousands of unseen eyes. I've researched long enough to realize areas like Fort McCoy aren't just training grounds. They are gateways to dimensions humans have never understood. He thought he was the hunter, searching for points in the dark, but I knew. He had unknowingly entered the territory of something else, an entity that needs no light to see, no sound to hunt. During the initial planning phase, the soldier continued in the email, I opened the map and saw the assigned coordinates would lead me across to the other side of the training area. Then loop back. I picture him sitting under dim tent light, finger-tracing lines on the paper. Unaware, that route would take him to the edge of living darkness. As the crow flies, it would take at least an hour and a half, he wrote. But walking it is much longer. Terrain goes up and down, and in the woods at night, you have to weave through trees, step slowly to avoid low branches hitting your eyes. He paused, whispering to himself, "Stay calm. Just be careful." But I knew the darkness at Fort McCoy forgives no mistakes. The misery of moving through the woods at night was palpable in his account. Dry branches snagged his clothes, the rustling leaves underfoot like endless whispers, and darkness suffocated the senses. I once heard a veteran describe it. Walking in the woods at night is like stepping into a beast's mouth. You don't know when it'll swallow you. For him, every step was a battle between willpower and unseen fear. Luckily, he continued, the points I needed to find were almost in a straight line. A flicker of relief passed through him, realizing that. I planned to find each point sequentially on the way out to the training area boundary, he wrote, his tone calm, but I sensed the underlying tension. He didn't want to rush, not out of laziness, but because he knew the deep woods were no place to be hasty. I estimated about 2.5 hours round trip, he calculated. Just go out, find all the points, then come back. The plan sounded simple, neat, like a familiar drill. But then he added a detail that caught my attention. I knew if I got back too early, the officer might assign another set of coordinates. He didn't want that, not because of fatigue, but because of a strange premonition he didn't dare acknowledge. So, he concluded, I decided to go out, find all the points, then rest for about an hour if there was time, before leisurely heading back. A reasonable, even relaxed plan. I imagine him thinking, take it slow, no need to hurry. He thought he was in control, but I know well. In the darkness of Fort McCoy, No one truly controls anything. That plan, however perfect, gave no warning of the nightmare lurking ahead. Under the dense canopy, he walked with the compass in hand. Red light from his headlamp painting distorted, moving shadows on the rough tree trunks. "Everything's fine," he muttered, trying to dispel the unease creeping into his heart. But I've read enough reports to understand that peace was just a fragile veneer, and beneath it, something else was waiting, patient and hungry. The first half of his plan went smoothly, almost too perfectly. I can picture him moving through the Fort McCoy woods, compass in hand, faint red headlamp beam sweeping across each control point. He found them without significant trouble, each logged coordinate a small victory against the oppressive darkness. But I knew that peace was just the prelude to the nightmare. Finally, around 10 p.m., he stopped to rest on a gentle slope. He sat down, back against a rough tree trunk, breath mingling with the cold air. The night sky was cloudy, but a full moon still pierced through, casting a pale silver light onto the forest. Strong winds pushed the clouds across continuously, sometimes hiding the moon, sometimes revealing it like a giant eye watching from above. "Sac, I could see pretty well when it was clear," he wrote, "but was nearly blind when the cloud cover was too thick." The flickering light, now bright, now dim, turned the scene into a phantasmagoric painting, as if the forest lived and breathed with the wind's rhythm. I shuddered reading this. That shifting light wasn't just unpredictable. It was often a precursor to strange phenomena I've recorded in my files. Initially, his trained soldier's instinct made him think it was a comrade. "I walked closer," he recounted in the email, planning to ask how the hell they got up there, if they were stuck and needed help. I imagine him advancing, boots crunching on dry grass, breath misting in the cold air, still believing he was facing a normal situation. But I knew he was mistaken. As he drew nearer, the figure in the tree stirred slightly, a slow, almost unnatural movement. And I got the distinct feeling that it turned towards me, he wrote, his writing trembling as if the memory still choked him. He stopped dead in his tracks, eyes glued to the dark silhouette stark against the silver clouds. I shuddered. In that moment, two sets of eyes, one human and one belonging to something else, met across the darkness. Mem. The air suddenly grew thick, heavy, as if space itself was constricting around him. Something was terribly wrong. A cold premonition ran down his spine, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to let fear overcome him. He was a National Guardsman, not someone easily scared to death by a buddy's prank. "Hey man, need a hand?" he called out, trying to keep his voice steady, though his heart hammered like it would break through his ribs. "Shipitas." But halfway through his sentence, the moonlight suddenly broke through the thick clouds, illuminating the clearing with a pale light like the gaze of death. In that brief moment, he realized the horrifying truth. The thing on the broken tree wasn't a soldier. It wasn't human. I can picture the scene, the silver light hitting the creature, exposing its grotesque form to his terrified eyes. It looked like a person stretched out, completely bald, he described, his voice still trembling as he typed the words to me. Its long arms wrapped around the tree trunk, thin as dry branches, but seemingly strong as steel. He couldn't see the face clearly, just a crumpled mass, no eyes, no mouth, as if the features were erased in a nightmare. I felt like it wasn't real, he whispered to himself at that moment. But his body knew. It was alive, breathing. It was as skinny as if it had never eaten, he continued, but tall, clearly strong enough to climb straight up that tree without difficulty. I recognized it immediately. These are characteristics of the pale crawler, a creature I've seen described in dozens of reports, from Wisconsin to remote European forests. Gaunt yet strong, grotesque yet threatening, a horrifying paradox of nature. It was definitely looking at me, he affirmed, and I felt the fear in every word he typed. Maybe it had been watching me the whole time I was in the clearing, even since I came down the hill. The feeling of being hunted, watched by something not of this world, made his blood run cold. He stood there, motionless, while the wind hissed through the canopy like the guttural laughter of someone who knew they held the upper hand. Sappho's. As the moonlight faded again, he heard the sound of dry branches scraping against bark, a small but sharp sound like claws on wood. "What are you?" he muttered, hand trembling as he gripped the compass. But there was no answer. I knew he hadn't just encountered a creature. He had entered its domain, where the red light from his headlamp was just a feeble flame against the endless darkness. His first reaction was a curse ripped from deep in his throat, echoing across the clearing. "Son of a bitch!" I could sense the terror in that shout. Not a soldier's anger, but the desperate cry of prey, realizing its hunter. Instantly, the creature in the tree reacted, sliding down the trunk with frightening speed, unlike any human movement. It slithered down like a phantom, its long limbs clinging to the bark, claws scraping the wood with ghastly screeches. He quickly switched on his headlamp, the weak red light cutting through the darkness. Through that bloody dimness, he caught it. The creature moving on all fours, fast and cunning, darting towards the dense forest edge, exactly where he had planned to go next. "It knows I'm here," he muttered, heart pounding like a war drum. How? A soldier's reflex kicked in. He frantically cycled the headlamp button to get to the white light, but the damn thing wouldn't cooperate. Off, flashing red, on, solid red, off, white. He struggled for precious seconds, fingers trembling, breath ragged. In those moments of frantic flashing, the intermittent light illuminated the creature, and he glimpsed it had reached the edge of the woods, just yards away. But I think it turned itself around and backed into the tree line, he speculated, his voice shaky recounting it. Maybe to keep watching me. That action wasn't blind animal instinct. It hinted at intelligence, the chilling caution of a predator playing cat and mouse. I shuddered. This wasn't the first time I'd heard of such a creature. A pale crawler with intelligence far beyond what humans want to believe. In the few seconds it took him to switch the lamp to white light, it had completely vanished into the forest darkness. He swept the beam along the tree line, the bright white light cutting through the night, but only saw silent trunks and dense foliage. The woods were now utterly still. No sound. But that silence wasn't peace. It was the mute threat from something still lurking. Faye. As it moved, he had heard the rustling of leaves, the scraping of claws on bark, mingling with the wind whistling through the dense forest. If it were still running, I should hear something, he reasoned, trying to keep his mind clear amidst the panic. But there's nothing, which means it stopped, and it's still watching me from the darkness. I imagine him standing there, flashlight trembling in his hand, feeling thousands of unseen eyes boring into his back. Sekoso. Fear enveloped him, cold as ice seeping into his flesh. His fumbling hands drew his knife from its sheath, the steel glinting under the white light, but it offered no comfort. "Stay away from me," he whispered, eyes scanning the tree line, searching for any movement. After what felt like an eternity, He began moving laterally, perpendicular to his original path, hoping to escape this invisible trap. Nan. He aimed for the paved hardball road running along the edge of the training area. "Once I get to the main road," he told himself, voice lost in his head, "I can follow it back to where the platoon parked." But that road was at least a 10-minute walk away. 10 minutes that felt like a lifetime through dense woods, where every bush could hide the creature. I knew this wasn't just a journey. It was a desperate flight for survival. Faiku. With no other choice, he had to leave the clearing. But each step was agonizingly slow, as if the ground clung to him. Wind blew through, carrying that strange whistling from deep in the woods, and he didn't dare turn around, didn't dare confirm the fear that it was right behind him, silently shadowing his every move. "Just make it to the road," he muttered. But in his heart, he knew. The darkness hadn't let him go yet. He walked slowly, eyes glued to the tree line, where he believed the creature still hid, waiting. I could feel the tension in his every step, the white beam from his headlamp trembling as it swept across the trees, as if trying to push back the darkness swallowing him. He didn't dare blink, afraid that in just 1 second of inattention, it would burst from the shadows. All the while, he had to fight the primal instinct to freeze on the spot, unable to move. "Don't stop," he whispered to himself, voice lost in the cold wind, though his legs trembled as if about to buckle. I knew that feeling wasn't just fear. It was the prey's response, upon realizing its hunter was something far beyond human comprehension. "Tsao?" After moving laterally about 10 yards, a sharp rustling sound echoed from the tree line, seemingly responding to his footsteps. He froze, heart pounding. "It's there," he muttered, eyes straining in the darkness, and he swore he saw movement, a thin shadow flitting between the tree trunks. "That was enough for me to turn and run," he admitted, voice filled with panic as he recounted it. "Nixie." He bolted, feet slipping on the wet grass, but after only a few steps, he tripped over a fallen log and sprawled onto the ground. The headlamp flew off, its white beam tumbling, casting chaotic light onto the canopy. He scrambled up, hands clawing at the cold earth, looking back towards the tree line. A distinct disturbance sounded, not wind, not small animals, but something larger, more terrifying, moving in the darkness. Through the flickering light, he glimpsed it. A skinny, bony leg and a pale backside retreating deeper into the woods. Just a second, but enough to sear the horrifying image into his mind. I recognized it immediately. The sign of a pale crawler, a creature that doesn't just hunt, but seems to relish its prey's panic. He stood there, breath ragged, blood seemingly frozen in his veins. Satuwa. At this point, fear exploded into full-blown panic. He just wanted to escape this nightmare immediately, but reason warned. Running for his life would only make him fall again. He started power walking, almost running, constantly glancing over his left shoulder. "Where are you?" he muttered, eyes darting along the tree line, trying to spot any sign of the creature in the silent darkness. "Sati." Over the rattling sounds of his own gear, backpack bumping, knife-scraping sheath, he could still hear it, a faint but steady rustling, moving parallel to him just inside the tree line. I pictured him walking, sweat pouring despite the biting cold, every sound from the deep woods like a knife stab to his nerves. It wasn't giving up. It was stalking him, patient and cunning. Emhua. As he neared the end of the clearing, the sound suddenly changed. It accelerated, the leaves rustling violently as if the creature was trying to cut him off before he could reach the next patch of woods. No other way, he thought, and he sprinted with all his might. His feet pounded the earth, breath burning in his throat, the white headlamp beam dancing wildly before him. He plunged into the woods. Luckily, the path ahead was clear, no branches or bushes blocking the way. But he didn't dare slow down. He was fairly certain he could still hear it, the sound of claws on dirt, the snap of dry wood, keeping pace right beside him in the darkness. "It's still there," he muttered, voice lost amidst the whistling wind. And I knew he wasn't imagining it. It was truly hunting him. I've spent my life tracing the threads of unsolved military mysteries. Today, I'll tell you a haunting story from Fort McCoy, where darkness isn't just night, but something alive, lurking. That night, in the cold forest surrounding the base, Lieutenant James, a confident young man, got lost in the thick fog. He didn't know the ground he trod wasn't just training land, but the domain of things not of this world. After hours wandering, James's legs trembled, his breath mingling with the freezing air. Finally, the headlights of LMTV military trucks flashed like a lighthouse amidst the nightmare. But that light couldn't dispel the terror clinging to him. The clock showed 12:15 a.m., the second hand seemingly slowing, as if time itself feared what he'd just endured. James stood there, clothes torn, covered in mud, eyes staring blankly into the void. An officer on duty, voice hoarse from the cold night, approached him. "What happened, Lieutenant? Got lost?" he asked, eyes searching. James just nodded, his dry lips unable to form clear words. "Why are you covered in mud like that? Fall down. Why are you breathing so hard?" The officer continued, his voice now laced with suspicion. I got lost on the way back," James stammered, trying to hide the horrifying truth screaming in his mind. Are you all right?" The officer frowned, hand unconsciously tightening on his flashlight. "I'm fine," James replied quickly, but his voice trembled, as if one more question would make everything shatter. He knew he couldn't tell the truth. How could he say that, in that dark forest, he came face to face with a creature? No, a monster, with eyes glowing red like burning coals, a freakishly tall body, and a growl that froze his blood. Tell them? They'd laugh at him, call him crazy, or worse, send him to med bay for a psych eval. No, James would rather keep this secret locked inside, letting it gnaw at him every night, than let anyone know. Years later, returning to Fort McCoy for training, James still felt the bone-deep chill of that night. "I never saw that thing again," he whispered to himself, but his eyes drifted towards the deep woods, as if searching for that terrifying figure. Fort McCoy, according to official records, has no history of mysterious disappearances. The two nearby towns, Sparta and Toma, are picture-perfect, peaceful. But I know well that what goes unrecorded is often the most frightening. James said he did solo night land nav a few times after that, without issue. But with every step he took, he felt a cold draft on the back of his neck, as if that thing was still watching from afar. Maybe it wasn't bravery, he told himself, voice hollow like it came from the bottom of a well. But me trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood, that the giant shadow was just a hallucination. But deep down, he knew it wasn't true. I've studied hundreds of similar cases. Skinwalkers, demons, or giant creatures hiding in the woods. They aren't just legends. They are living entities, waiting, and sometimes choosing their prey randomly. James might have been one of them, but then again, James paused, eyes distant as if piercing the night. Maybe this world is much stranger than I thought. His words hung in the air, heavy as an unbreakable curse. As the story concludes, a sense of unease spreads. What really happened in the Fort McCoy woods that night? What looked at James with glowing red eyes? And more importantly, is it still there, waiting for the next lost soul? I approach this part of the story with a wry, knowing smile. He paused, voice deep like an echo from an old cellar. I have to interject here. A lieutenant claiming to be a master navigator, always finding every point before the rest of the team, sounds suspicious already. James, that lieutenant, used to boast all over the barracks about his skills. But I know well, most newly commissioned officers, even the most confident, can still get lost in the deep woods, leaving behind silent screams no one hears. However, James wasn't a complete rookie. Before becoming an officer, he was prior enlisted, having roughed it through moonless nights where survival skills were the only thing keeping him alive. His abilities, I must admit, were more reliable than many others. But then his eyes took on a cold glint. Even so, this is one of those stories that makes even me, someone who has heard hundreds of eerie accounts, feel a chill down my spine every time I reread it. There's something in the Fort McCoy woods that doesn't belong to this world. Imagine being James that night, lost, heart pounding, every rustle of leaves sounding like the footsteps of an invisible predator. I dare not dwell on the sheer terror of living through that moment, when you know you're not alone, yet you see no one. Online, people scoff at stories about the rake or pale crawlers, those gaunt, pale-skinned creatures with claws like sickles. It's all just creepypasta, cheap fiction. Some anonymous keyboard warrior declares, "Really? Then what did James see?" Marks, people say it's a joke, that these creatures only exist in the imaginations of online horror writers from decades past. But when James recounted it, his voice trembled. It was there, tall and lanky, stark white eyes, looking at me like it wanted to devour me. So what does that mean? Either James and dozens of other soldiers are making things up for kicks, or there really is something, gaunt, grotesque and hungry, stalking the woods amidst the wild mountains. He sighed, his voice like wind whistling through a crack. This isn't the first time I've heard stories like this. I have a whole archive of similar encounters, from skinwalkers in the desert to Bigfoot in the deep woods. James is just one small piece of the puzzle. I'll see. And believe me, James's two stories aren't even the most horrifying among those I know. There are things far more terrifying, hidden deep in the shadows, waiting. If you live near the woods, lock your doors and windows tight every night. Leave no opening for the darkness to seep in. I've seen strange handprints on glass, long, thin, not like human hands. And if you're training in the field, his warning grew harsher. Never fall asleep on guard duty. James once told me, "I heard it breathing, Professor, right behind me. But when I turned around, there was nothing." Darkness isn't just the absence of light. To me, it's a living entity, harboring unforeseen dangers. James might have escaped that time, he mused, but not everyone is so lucky. I find people often have the prejudice that officers, especially lieutenants, are never good at land navigation. But I'll tell you a story that shakes that prejudice, and perhaps sends a chill down your spine. James, the original storyteller, not only wanted to prove the opposite, but also pulled me into a haunting personal memory. "I need to tell you this," he told me late one night, eyes flashing with unease. "It happened with my recon team, and I swear I've never forgotten it." James began. "My 6-man team was part of the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit. We were sent to Guam, a suffocating island where the jungle feels like it wants to swallow you whole. Sades, that training mission wasn't simple." James continued, his voice trembling slightly. "We were thrown into a terrible, dense jungle. Trees packed tight, air heavy with the smell of damp earth, and something else, unnatural. I've never seen a worse place. Their objective was cold, clear. Observe and gather radio intelligence from an enemy position. I've researched places like this. The jungles of Guam aren't just battlefields. They're home to ancient things, entities the military never records." James told me, "It was like an armory," he recounted. "They built buildings, had role players acting as enemies coming and going constantly. But I swear, Professor, sometimes I heard strange noises, not human sounds, but like claws scraping on rock." The mission escalated when James's team spotted a high-value target, HVT, set to appear. "They hid in the bushes, observing," he whispered, "but I felt like they were the ones being hunted." "We reported over the radio," James continued, his voice now soft as wind through leaves. "Then the raid force stormed in, breaking doors, gunfire erupting, capturing the bad guys. Everything by the book. But, Professor, I knew something wasn't right." When the raid force left, James looked back at the jungle. A gaunt figure, unusually tall, stood motionless among the trees. It didn't move, but I felt it was watching me. A typical recon mission, people would say. Patience, skill, and a bit of luck. I know better. The jungles of Guam don't just test navigation skills. They test your courage against the nameless, shapeless things that are always present. 3 days passed in that suffocating Guam jungle. James's team sent all their reports. The raid force was en route, or so we thought. Their next mission was clear. Meet the raid force at a rally point deep in the jungle. James recalled, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "That was our exit, Professor. They were supposed to pick us up and pull us out of that green hell by truck." Under the thick cover of night, the 6-man team moved silently. They reached the rally point, an open field, grass knee-high, wind whistling through it like the whispers of something nameless. "We sat there, exhausted," James recounted, "but I didn't dare close my eyes. Hours passed, slowly and heavily. In the jungle, silence is never your friend. I've heard many soldiers say that when you wait too long, you start hearing things, snapping twigs, sighs, that you can't explain." Several hours passed. Nobody showed, James continued, his voice now tinged with anxiety. I started to wonder, were we abandoned? Or worse, did that thing I saw in the jungle the night before do something to them? Then suddenly, headlights flashed in the distance. The raid force appeared, engine roar shattering the night. Guess what happened next? They drove right past James's team's location, speeding off like bats out of hell. James jumped up, shouting across the field, "What the hell is going on?" He turned to his teammates, voice frustrated. "They're going the wrong way. I knew it." Panic mixed with annoyance left the whole team stunned, watching the lights recede. How could it not be funny, seeing a whole convoy of trucks turning around in the jungle? But to me, this wasn't just a navigational error. There was something in the Guam air that night, making everything go awry. The raid force had to turn back, an awkward maneuver, embarrassingly clumsy. James recounted, eyes glinting with mockery. 10 huge trucks crammed onto a tiny dirt road, high banks on both sides. They did like a 350-point turn, tires grinding the dirt. Looked like a bunch of kids learning to drive for the first time, James chuckled dryly. I saw strange tracks on the ground in Guam. Not tire tracks, but long, deep footprints, like something that didn't belong to the raid force. Finally, after the clumsy maneuvering, the trucks got pointed the right way and picked up James's team. But he wrote to me saying, climbing onto the truck, James glanced back at the field. Something was standing there. Professor. Tall, thin, motionless. It didn't follow, but I knew it was watching. This incident might seem comical, the raid force getting lost, turning around like a sitcom scene. But it also shows, even in training, navigation, and coordination can collapse. And when that happens, the darkness exploits the opportunity. Finally, after the awkward U-turn ballet, the raid force returned to the rally point. The trucks stopped, headlights sweeping the field, and James's team breathed a sigh of relief. But the joy was short-lived. Just as they sprinted towards the trucks, the heavens opened up. A torrential downpour slammed down. James recounted, voice tinged with annoyance. We'd been dry for 3 days. Now we're running in the rain, trying to keep gear dry, as if the Guam jungle wanted one last prank on us. They scrambled onto the back of a 7-ton truck, tossing gear up, rainwater splashing everywhere. Lucky us. James chuckled dryly. They managed to stay dry, but felt a chill, not from the rain, but from something in the air. I understand. The jungle never lets go easily. The whole team climbed aboard, sitting crammed in the truck bed, utterly exhausted after 3 tense days. James leaned back. Mission's over, I thought. Just sit here, relax, wait for the truck to roll. But I think he was wrong. The darkness wasn't finished with him yet. The convoy sat motionless, unmoving. Engines idled, but the wheels didn't turn. James frowned. Drowsiness vanishing. Something's wrong. He felt it, like a cold draft slipping through the canvas cover. Zazawan. As James sat there, mind foggy from 2 sleepless days, a tense conversation drifted from outside. A sergeant's sharp voice cut through the rain. The lieutenant doesn't know where the hell we are. Terrible navigation. Every soldier's nightmare. James tilted his head, trying to hear better. The sergeant yelled at someone else, maybe the platoon leader or assistant. Did you hear me? He's lost. In the middle of this goddamn jungle. The fear of officer incompetence resurfaced, like a ghost that never leaves the military. I've seen this too many times. A confident lieutenant, but when night falls, they get lost. Not just on the map, but amidst the things lurking in the dark. James nodded, adding, I heard a branch snap somewhere near the truck, but nobody paid attention. Then a sudden order shattered the air. The sergeant shouted, voice hoarse, Everybody off the trucks. Infantry, unload gear, prep equipment, weapons ready. We're moving to the raid location on foot from here. The entire team was stunned. Rain still pouring down as if to drown them. Shucks. James turned to his teammate, whispering, From here, in this rain, are they crazy? I don't think they were crazy. They were scared. Something out there made them unwilling to sit in those trucks any longer. The whole team jumped to the ground, mud splattering their boots, rifles clutched tight. The rain drowned out most sounds, but James swore he heard a faint hiss. Not wind, but like the breath of a creature hidden somewhere deep in the jungle. That order wasn't just a reaction to a navigational mistake. It was a silent cry for help. That night, in the Guam jungle, they weren't just facing the enemy, but also something ancient, hungry, and watching their every step. James, the team's navigator, stood in the rain, map crumpled in his hand. He told me, "I knew this area well, Professor. I'd studied the maps for hours, walked all over the training zone. I knew where we were and where the enemy was." But then, James, eyes filled with anxiety. When they gave the order to dismount, he knew instantly this was the worst possible position. About 6/10 of a mile of dense jungle ahead, not ordinary terrain, but a living nightmare. That jungle wasn't just a challenge of distance. James stressed, his voice trembling slightly. "It wasn't just hard going, Professor. Everything in there seemed to want to kill you. Sharp thorns everywhere, sticking into your skin like acupuncture needles. Just walking felt like agony." I've heard many soldiers talk about jungles like that. Not just terrain, but the feeling of being hunted by it. James once told me he was terrified of thorns hitting his eyes, seriously. Every step felt like playing Russian roulette with the darkness. Then James shuddered, his voice lowering. And the spiders. He'd never seen so many spiders. At night, you don't see them, but cobwebs constantly brushed against my face leading the team. It felt like hundreds of tiny eyes staring. When dawn broke, the revealed scene stunned the whole team. James described horror in his eyes. It was like the forbidden forest in Harry Potter, cobwebs strung everywhere, thick, glistening in the faint light, giant spiders, big as fists, crawling all over. Unbelievably horrifying. Of course, I know Guam has a serious spider problem, yes. But I suspect more than just spiders lived in that jungle. I've read reports of larger, faster creatures hiding among the trees. Things the military never records. James despaired, thinking it impossible to cross that jungle quickly. Thorns, spiders, and the thick darkness would swallow them before they reached the objective. He turned to his teammate, whispering, "Is the lieutenant crazy, ordering a move through that? They'll be torn apart before they see the enemy." The lieutenant's decision was a fatal mistake. Not because he was stupid, but because he didn't understand this jungle was more alive than he thought. Us. I once heard a soldier recount, "One time I saw a figure among the webs, not a spider, but tall, gaunt, standing still, as if waiting." James might not have seen it yet, but I bet it had seen him. James concluded, his voice heavy. "My team knew the area well, but the lieutenant didn't. His mistake wasn't just inexperience. It was failing to realize that in the Guam jungle, you are never the only predator. That jungle didn't just test navigation skills. It tested your courage against the nameless things, the things hiding among thorns and webs, waiting for one mistake, like the lieutenant's decision that night." James, or Sergeant Loman as he introduced himself, sat in the truck bed, his weary breath mingling with the sounds of the infantry preparing outside. He knew the situation clearly. A wrong decision was pushing the entire unit into the jaws of death. In a quiet moment, amidst the downpour, James wrestled with himself. He later told me he sat there, warm and dry in the truck. But then he thought, if he said nothing, those soldiers would die, or worse, vanish into the jungle without a trace. Conscience rose like a roar in his chest. James gritted his teeth and jumped out of the truck. Cold rain instantly slapped his face, clothes soaking, but he didn't stop. That's the moment that defines a soldier. Facing fear, whether it's rain or darkness. James walked through the ranks, mud clinging to his boots, his voice rising above the rain. "Hey, Who's in charge here? I need to talk to the navigator." The soldiers pointed forward, their eyes weary but questioning. At the lead vehicle, under dim light, the lieutenant and a sergeant hunched over a crumpled map. Rain dripped from their helmets, smearing the paper. I bet they had no clue where they were, and that was more dangerous than they realized. James approached, clearing his throat politely amidst the roaring rain. "Excuse me, gentlemen." The two looked up, the sergeant frowning, the lieutenant scowling in annoyance. "Oh yeah, who are you? What do you want?" Their tone was sharp, dismissive. James stood tall, rain streaming down his face. "Sir, I'm Sergeant Loman, the recon team's navigator. Are you gentlemen really planning to move out from here?" His voice was calm, but I know. Inside, he was screaming about what was about to happen. The lieutenant replied quickly, overly confident, "That's right. So?" He trailed off, as if everything was obvious. But James didn't budge, his gaze sharp. "Sir, I know this area. Moving out from here is suicide." James wasn't just worried about thorns or spiders. I heard him recount later. I felt something in the jungle watching us, not the enemy, but something ancient, patient, waiting for a mistake. The sergeant turned, voice hoarse. "What did you say, Sergeant? Suicide? You think you know better than the lieutenant?" James shook his head firmly. "No, Sergeant, but I know this jungle. 6/10 of a mile of razor thorns, giant spiders, and darkness that forgives no one. I've studied jungles like Guam's, not just spiders living there. There are other creatures, tall, gaunt, hiding among the trees. James might not have seen them, but I bet they smelled him. Nasanti." The conversation was interrupted by a branch snapping somewhere in the jungle. James flinched, but the lieutenant just waved it off. "Don't get any ideas, Sergeant. Let's move." The lieutenant's mistake wasn't just bad navigation, it was failing to recognize the Guam. Jungle was alive and hungry. The lieutenant, confident to the point of arrogance, jabbed a finger onto the wet map. "The enemy location is directly north of us, from this current position." He spoke as if everything was under control. He continued, tone certain. "We'll cut through this brush, through this jungle, and be on the enemy in 15 minutes. James, aka Sergeant Loman, stood there, rain streaming down his face, thinking silently, 15 minutes? He's dreaming inside a nightmare. The plan sounded simple on paper. But paper doesn't tell you about razor thorns, giant spiders, or silent figures in the dark. The lieutenant had never set foot in the Guam jungle, but James had, and he knew the horrifying truth. James emphasized, his voice firm. "I've patrolled through that jungle, Professor. Not 15 minutes. More like 3 hours if you're lucky. I told them, this jungle is hell. Thorns cut like knives, cobwebs slap your face, and it feels like something's always watching." The sergeant beside the lieutenant now turned to James, eyes almost pleading. "Buddy, please help us out. This guy doesn't know what he's doing." It showed the desperation when a lost officer puts the whole unit in danger. James took a deep breath, his voice calm but decisive. "Listen, gentlemen, you don't need to send the troops through that hellhole jungle. Just drive straight about 3/10 of a mile down this road, take a left, go another 6/10 of a mile north. You'll be right on top of the enemy." The lieutenant looked up, eyes flickering between confidence and doubt. He glanced at the sergeant, who gave a slight nod as if to say, "Listen to him." In that moment, James didn't just save the unit. He perhaps saved them from something worse than the enemy. Finally, The lieutenant sighed, reluctantly conceding, "All right, fine. Everybody back on the trucks." His voice echoed through the rain, but James felt a cold draft pass by, not from the rain, but from the jungle behind them. The whole team hastily climbed back onto the trucks, boots caked with mud. The sergeant pulled James aside, voice low but urgent. "Hey, buddy, please ride in the lead vehicle with the lieutenant. Give the driver directions for me, will you?" James nodded, though unease still lingered. But climbing onto the truck, James heard a faint hiss from the jungle. Not wind, but like the breath of something that knew we were leaving. The sergeant's request wasn't just about trusting James's experience. It was about survival. I've read reports. Units going through the Guam jungle without a good navigator often don't come back complete. As the trucks started rolling, James sat beside the driver, map in hand. The lieutenant might think he was in charge, but that night, James was the real driver, not just navigating the road, but navigating the darkness, stalking the whole unit. James, Sergeant Loman, reported back to his own team leader amidst the rain. "Hey boss, I'm riding in the lead vehicle for the rest of this mission." He climbed aboard, ready to lead the whole convoy out of the lieutenant's mess. Sitting beside the driver, James gave directions calmly. "Just drive straight down this road. There's a left turn coming up." The driver nodded, but when James continued, "Turn left here," the driver muttered under his breath, voice full of frustration. "Jesus Christ, we've passed this spot 3 times already." The lieutenant's incompetence had turned the entire convoy into a farce, driving in useless circles in the Guam jungle. If it weren't for James, they might still be lost, or worse, swallowed by the jungle. The convoy turned left, and just as James predicted, they stopped right before the enemy position. No razor thorns, no giant spiders, just a nice road leading straight to the objective. Sometimes, the simplest path is the hardest one to see. Infantry jumped off the trucks, weapons ready. Gunfire erupted, shouts tore through the night, gunpowder smoke mingling with the damp earth smell. James sat in the truck, breathing a sigh of relief. Mission accomplished. Nobody had to die in the jungle, at least not that night. James had seen dozens of things like this, but this was one of the funnier ones when thinking about lieutenants and their land nav skills. They think they're smart, but end up needing me to pull them out of trouble. I record this story as an interesting testament. The military isn't just filled with supernatural mysteries, but also very human errors, sometimes laughably absurd, yet no less dangerous. James saved his unit from the Guam jungle, not just from thorns and spiders, but perhaps from something larger lurking in the dark. I've read reports. Teams that get lost there often don't come back complete. As the truck pulled away, James looked back down the road. A figure stood there, tall, thin, motionless. It didn't follow, but the truth is, James saw it. I believe James. I want to remind you to always stay safe, whether on the battlefield or in the deep woods. This world holds not only human enemies, but also mysteries far beyond our imagination. Until the next stories, we will open more classified files where skinwalkers, demons, and nameless creatures still wait in the shadows of the military. Don't fall asleep on guard duty, friends.